The morning I found a black car idling outside my rundown shop. I thought it was a customer with more bills I couldn't pay. Instead, a man in an overcoat handed me a sealed envelope. No explanation, just my name written in perfect script. I tore it open right there on the sidewalk, and what I saw inside made my hands shake so hard I almost dropped it. The shop always sounded tired at this hour. The old space heater in the corner hummed like a distant engine, coughing every few minutes before settling into a breathy whir. A fluorescent tube flickered above the workbench, washing everything in that pale, honest light that shows dust and truth in equal measure. Grease streaks ribboned across the floor like faded road maps. Ethan stood in the middle of it, hands black to the knuckles, trying to coax one last bolt to loosen before the night surrendered to morning. He had learned to measure days by small victories. A rusted exhaust freed without snapping, a customer who paid in full, a part that arrived on time. Tonight's victory was a stubborn alternator bracket on a sedan that had seen too many winters. He leaned in, exhaled slow, and felt the tool bite. "Come on," he said, not to the metal, but to the whole idea of things working out when they need to. The bolt turned a fraction, then another, and finally yielded with a dry creak that pleased him more than it should have. He set the wrench down gently, as if it might startle. The clock above the office window read past 10. The town outside had gone thin and quiet, a strip of shuttered storefronts and sodium streetlights burning halos into the cold. He could feel the winter pressing against the corrugated walls, trying to slip through. The heater pushed back, proud and inadequate. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, checked the ledger, and did the arithmetic he already knew by heart. Parts, rent, utilities, the overdue notice folded under the paperweight like a small, dignified secret. He wrote another number in the margin, a habit that made him feel in control, and closed the book. There was a dream he kept on the back shelf next to the cartons of oil filters. A bigger bay, new lifts, a sign with fresh paint, and a phone number that rang for good reasons. Not a fantasy. He had sketches, quotes, even a plot of land he drove past sometimes just to picture the building set back from the road, clean light pouring out onto a neat slab. But paper and courage weren't enough. The numbers refused to bend. He made his closing rounds. The red tool chest got a palm on the top drawer, the compressor a pat on the side as he flipped the switch. Lights clicked off in sequence. Bay, bench, front. He liked the ritual. It made the day feel complete, even when money didn't. In the quiet, he could hear the ticking of metal cooling down. He stood a moment in the dimness, letting his breath fog and drift. "Tomorrow," he said softly. It wasn't a promise. It was a way to keep going. He pulled the chain on the last overhead bulb, leaving only the office lamp on, and stepped into the small square room where a coffee mug sat ringed on a receipt. He capped a pen, stacked the slips, and traced his finger over a faded photograph taped to the desk. The shop the day he signed the lease, him younger by carelessness if not by years, grinning in a way that made him feel protective of that version of himself. He flipped the dark switch and the office fell into amber shadow. Time to go. The bay door groaned upward, and cold rushed in, clean and uncomplicated. He locked the side entrance, tested the handle twice, always twice, and pulled the door to the street shut behind him. The town gave him back only wind. He stood under the awning and tucked his chin into his collar, eyes lingering on the hand-painted letters on the glass. Ethan's Auto. They weren't straight, but they were honest. He reached for the exterior light, thumb hovering over the switch. Then he stopped, listening to the night breathe. It was a habit, too, listening, as if the dark might give him early warning of what was coming next. Somewhere a truck downshifted. Somewhere a dog barked once and thought better of it. The heater inside clicked and fell silent, a final little bow. He pressed the light off, and the sign went to sleep. On the walk to his truck, his boots scraped the gritty frost. He counted the steps, 10 to the curb, 4 more to the door. It made the distance feel shaped, manageable. He opened the cab, tossed the rag onto the passenger seat, and paused with one hand on the steering wheel. The town looked back at him, quiet, narrow, alive in its own stubborn way. He took a breath he hadn't noticed he needed and let it go, watching it plume and fade. "Tomorrow," he said again, and this time it reached a little further than the night. He turned the key, and the engine caught. Headlights brushed the shop's facade, catching the faint scuffs where deliveries had bumped the wall, catching the edges of possibility he refused to misplace. He eased onto the empty street, the tires whispering over the cold. Behind him, the small building settled into its bones. Ahead, the road held its blank face steady. He drove home with the heater on low and the radio low too, the kind of quiet that felt like company when you were used to doing your own saving. The wind had sharpened by the time Ethan reached for the switch that killed the outside light. He squinted down the sidewalk, more out of habit than curiosity. That was when he heard it. A staccato tapping against the pavement, uneven, too hurried for the icy street. He turned, eyes adjusting to the glow spilling from the shop's awning. A woman was moving carefully across the sidewalk, leaning heavily on a pair of crutches. Her shoulders hunched against the cold, her breath showing in pale bursts. She was fighting both the weather and her own body. The sound changed, a hollow crack, like a branch breaking in the dead of winter. One of the crutches gave way. Metal splintered, and before she could steady herself, her weight pitched forward. She let out a cry, raw and startled, and fell hard onto the salted concrete. The echo rang too loud in the lonely street. Ethan didn't weigh fatigue against compassion. He was already moving, boots skidding on frost. He closed the distance and crouched beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight but steady. She tried to sit up, one hand pressed against her knee, the other clutching the useless crutch. Her face was pale, lips trembling more from shock than cold. "I'm fine," she began, but the word caught. Pain shadowed her eyes, and she bit down on it. Ethan eased a hand under her elbow. "Easy. Let me help." He lifted carefully, slow enough to let her balance catch up. She stood shakily, gripping the one crutch still intact. The broken one lay on the sidewalk, its shaft bent like a snapped bone. Ethan picked it up, turning the metal in his hands, testing the fracture with a mechanic's instinct. She tried to explain, voice strained but polite. I had surgery. Couldn't afford a new set, borrowed these. They're old. Guess they gave out on me." Her words carried something more than apology. Embarrassment. The kind people wear when they admit too much about how close the edge really is. Ethan glanced at her, seeing beyond the wool coat and the careful makeup smudged by the fall. He recognized the kind of struggle that doesn't show on a ledger but lives in the quiet corners of someone's life. "Wait here," he said firmly, tone more directive than optional. Before she could protest, Ethan turned and pushed back through the shop's door. The heater's breath met him like an ally. He strode to the workbench, lit the welder, and set the broken crutch on the table. His hands moved by instinct, cutting away the bent section, rejoining the pieces with a clean seam, sparks spitting against the dark. The rhythm of repair steadied him, just as it had steadied him through every broken alternator and seized axle. When he stepped back outside, the night had grown quieter. The woman was waiting, arms folded tightly across her chest, shifting on the one working crutch. Ethan held out the repaired one, still warm from the weld. "Try it now." She hesitated, then took it. Her hand brushed his briefly, cold skin meeting the rough warmth of calloused fingers. She positioned the crutch, pressed weight into it, and tested a step. The metal held. Relief flickered across her face, fragile and genuine. "You fixed it?" she asked softly, as though it were improbable. "Reinforced both," Ethan said, nodding toward the second crutch he had strengthened while he was at it. "They'll last you a while now." The gratitude came quick and quiet. Her eyes shimmered in the dim light, tears threatening but held back by dignity. "How much do I owe you?" Ethan shook his head once, firm. "Nothing. Keep your money. You need it more than I do." The offer stopped her. People rarely refused payment in her experience. She could tell. She stared at him, confusion folding into something warmer. The tears she had been holding slipped free, catching on her lashes before sliding down. She lowered her gaze, voice breaking into a whisper. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." Ethan gave a small shrug, as if to say it wasn't worth such weight. But he felt the words land somewhere inside him, where dreams and debts fought for space. "Just doing what I can," he said, brushing frost from his sleeve. For him, it was a small thing, an evening's detour, a weld, a refusal of cash. For her, it was something that shifted the ground beneath her. Neither spoke again for a moment. The night air held its silence, and in it, something unspoken passed between them. The rare recognition that sometimes help is given without angle, without transaction, without reason other than to be human. The repaired crutches steadied her frame, but she lingered in the glow of the shop's awning as if reluctant to leave. The wind tugged at her coat, and her breath clouded in short bursts, but her eyes stayed fixed on Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes, but threaded with something deeper, a quiet astonishment that such help still existed in the world. She adjusted her grip on the handles, testing their balance again. The reinforced weld caught the light in a clean line of silver. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "Most people wouldn't have." Ethan rubbed his hands together, not for warmth, but to keep them busy. Compliments sat awkwardly with him, like tools he hadn't learned how to use. "It was broken," he said simply, nodding at the crutch. "Broken things should be fixed. That's all." Her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something softer. "Still, nobody's done something like this for me in a long time." She paused, searching his face as if to memorize it. "You remind me there are still good people." He shifted his weight, uneasy under the weight of her words. He wanted to tell her he wasn't some saint, that he had bills piled on his counter, that his own life was bent in places he couldn't weld straight. But he kept that to himself. Some truths weren't for strangers, and tonight wasn't about him. She cleared her throat gently. "What's your name?" "Ethan." "Ethan," she repeated, as though the syllables deserved careful handling. "I won't forget that." He nodded, already half turning toward the shop door. He had learned that goodbyes worked best when they were short, clean, and left room for dignity. But she wasn't ready to leave it at that. Her voice lowered into something almost fragile. "I wish I could repay you somehow." "You just did," he said, surprising himself. Her puzzled expression drew a faint shrug from him. "By saying thank you and meaning it." The tears that had threatened earlier finally traced down her cheeks, glistening in the cold light. She brushed them away quickly, embarrassed by their persistence. "You really don't want anything?" Ethan shook his head, the lines of fatigue around his eyes deepening, but not unkind. "I'm not keeping score." That seemed to undo her more than any refusal of money. She stood a moment longer, then straightened, testing the firm strength of both crutches once more. Her chin lifted with a trace of regained dignity. "Then I'll just say this, Ethan. You've given me more than you realize." She turned then, careful with each step, the new rhythm of metal tips tapping steady against the icy sidewalk. Ethan watched her until the night folded her into shadow, the faint echo of her movement fading like a heartbeat into distance. He exhaled slowly, shoulders loosening as if he'd been holding more tension than he knew. The shop behind him hummed faintly, the heater struggling but faithful. He looked down at his hands, scarred, stained, but capable, and thought about how something so small could feel so weighted to someone else. When he finally locked the door again, the night returned to its silence, as though nothing had happened at all. But Ethan felt the difference. Not in his pocket, not in his ledger, but in that quiet corner of himself where weariness and hope still kept each other company. The days that followed blurred into one another, each one stitched together by the same steady rhythm of labor and fatigue. Ethan opened the shop each morning before the sun had burned the frost from the sidewalks, and he closed it well after the streetlights blinked awake. He worked with a kind of quiet discipline, as though motion itself could hold back the tide of bills stacked on his desk at home. January air crept into his bones, seeping through the thin insulation of the shop. The heater groaned like an old friend who showed up out of loyalty more than strength. Ethan would rub his hands together over the vent before pulling another wrench from the drawer, fingers numbed by steel and grease. His shoulders ached by midday, his back by dusk, but he kept moving because stopping meant noticing the silence, and the silence always whispered about overdue notices, rising rent, and the kind of failure he couldn't afford. Customers came and went. Some paid in cash, most by card, a few by promise. Ethan didn't chase those promises too hard. He understood how life pressed people down. When a single mother asked if she could bring the rest next week, he nodded, though he knew next week often stretched into never. He added it to the ledger anyway, his neat handwriting making the debt look less uncertain than it was. At night, he drove the same road home, headlights catching the same empty storefronts. He passed the parcel of land he once imagined building on, flat, snow-dusted, with a for sale sign tilted in the wind. Sometimes he slowed just enough to picture the garage bays lined up, the paint fresh, the logo sharp on the sign. Then the light would change, and reality pulled him forward again. Sleep rarely came easy. He lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, hearing the tick of the baseboard heater and the distant hum of traffic. His mind replayed numbers. How much he owed the bank, how much he might scrape together if business picked up, how far short it would still fall. In those hours, he felt like a man running a race against time with lead weights strapped to his ankles. Still, he rose each morning and unlocked the shop. The world didn't care about exhaustion. Cars still broke down, and engines still needed coaxing. Work was survival, and survival was enough to keep moving. Clara's face crossed his mind once or twice during that month, not in the way of daydreams, but like a quiet reminder. The way she had looked at him that night, eyes wet, voice steady, had carried more weight than the moment itself suggested. But he never expected to see her again. She had been someone passing through, like dozens of others he had helped, just another person in need of a hand. The months stretched on, each day nearly indistinguishable from the one before. And yet, beneath the sameness, something invisible was shifting. Ethan couldn't feel it, not yet. But the silence that haunted him was about to break. The morning had started like so many others, frost clinging to the shop windows, Ethan coaxing life out of the heater with a muttered curse, and the scent of burnt coffee filling the office. He had just settled into the day's first repair when the sound of tires crunching against gravel broke the stillness. Not the rattle of an old pickup or the stuttering idle of a sedan held together with duct tape. This was smoother, deliberate. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside. A sleek black car rolled to a stop in front of the shop, its surface gleaming like liquid glass beneath the pale winter sun. The kind of car no one in his neighborhood drove, the kind of car that turned heads without trying. The driver's door opened, and a man in a dark overcoat stepped out, movements efficient, polished. He didn't look around, didn't take in the shop or the cracked sidewalk. He already knew exactly where he was. "Ethan?" the man asked, voice crisp, almost rehearsed. "Yeah," Ethan answered, brow furrowed. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, heavy ivory paper pressed flat, his gloved hand holding it like something delicate. He extended it without ceremony. "For you." Ethan hesitated, instinct prickling. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of such gestures. Bills, yes. Notices, certainly. But not this. He took the envelope carefully, his fingers smudging the pristine surface with oil. Before he could ask a question, the man nodded once, returned to the driver's seat, and in seconds the black car was gone, taillights disappearing down the street as if it had never been there at all. The shop felt suddenly too quiet. Ethan stood in the cold, turning the envelope over in his hands. No markings, no return address. Just his name written in a steady, elegant script that didn't belong to collection agencies or utility companies. His chest tightened as he slid a rough thumb under the seal and pulled it open. The letter inside unfolded neatly, the handwriting precise and graceful. "Dear Ethan, a month ago, you repaired more than just a crutch. You repaired my faith in humanity. I never told you who I really am. My name is Clara Weston. I am the owner of Weston Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it. You saw me not as money, not as status, but simply as a person in need. That kind of kindness is rare. Consider this gift not as charity, but as gratitude. Come see me." His eyes dropped to the slip tucked behind the paper. A check. He blinked once, twice, then gripped it tighter, as though it might vanish if the cold wind caught it. Zeros stretched across the line in a way that made his head spin. Enough to erase every debt. Enough to breathe life into the dream he had only dared to sketch on paper. Enough to make the impossible suddenly, terrifyingly, real. For a moment he couldn't move. His hands trembled, the check fluttering like a leaf. A mechanic who had lived by small victories and stubborn faith now stood in possession of a future he couldn't yet comprehend. His throat tightened. He pressed the letter back into its envelope and clutched it against his chest, grounding himself in the steady thump of his own heartbeat. The shop around him was the same, tools scattered, the heater groaning, the faint smell of grease lingering in the air, but nothing felt unchanged. The world had shifted in the span of a sealed envelope, and Ethan, for the first time in years, wasn't sure whether to laugh or fall to his knees. Ethan sat in the lobby of Weston Industries, his work boots out of place against the marble floor. The building stretched upward like ambition carved into steel and glass, every surface gleaming, every edge sharp. He had showered twice before coming, scrubbed grease from his hands until the skin reddened, but he still felt the weight of oil and years of labor clinging to him. Men in suits passed with briefcases and brisk strides, their glances brief and curious. Who was the man with calloused hands and a folded envelope clutched in his jacket pocket? A receptionist approached him with a practiced smile. "Mr. Ethan? Ms. Weston will see you now." The words landed like a drumbeat. He rose, awkwardly smoothing his shirt, and followed her down a corridor where the carpet silenced every step. The door at the end opened, and suddenly the space widened into an office lined with windows that poured light onto polished wood and leather. Behind the desk stood Clara. She was not the fragile figure he remembered leaning on crutches under the winter night. She stood tall now, her frame graceful, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of command rather than recovery. Yet her smile, the warmth in it, was the same. It softened the room, cut through the wealth and the formality like a familiar chord. "Ethan," she said, voice steady but touched with something personal. "I'm glad you came." He nodded, words caught behind the sudden dryness in his throat. The last time he had seen her, she had been trembling in the cold, thanking him with tears. Now she looked every bit the woman whose name signed checks large enough to alter lives. She gestured to a chair. "Please sit." He lowered himself carefully, hands gripping his knees. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted, his voice low. "You don't have to say anything," Clara replied gently. "That night, when you helped me, you didn't ask for explanations. You didn't see a stranger with broken crutches. You just saw someone who needed help." She paused, eyes softening. "Do you know how rare that is, Ethan?" He shifted, uncomfortable under praise but unable to look away. "It wasn't much. Just some welding." Her smile widened, though her eyes glistened with memory. "It was more than welding. You gave me dignity when I had none left. And you refused money when you clearly needed it. That stayed with me. It reminded me of what I'd forgotten in all this." She swept her hand across the office, the view of the city skyline. "That kindness isn't measured by what we have, but by what we give without expectation." Ethan swallowed, the envelope heavy in his pocket. "The check, it's too much. I don't know if I can accept it." Clara leaned forward, her voice softening further. "It's not charity, Ethan. It's gratitude. You fixed my crutch when I felt broken. Now let me help fix your dream." The words struck deeper than he expected. He lowered his gaze, blinking against the sudden burn in his eyes. He had worked years for scraps of progress, carrying hope like a burden. And now, across a polished desk, someone was handing it back to him freely. His hands trembled despite his efforts to steady them. "You have no idea what this means," he whispered. Clara reached across the desk, her touch light but sure as it brushed his arm. "I think I do. Because once, I was the one hoping for a chance too. You gave me more than a repair, Ethan. You gave me faith." He couldn't hold back then. The tears came quiet, unembarrassed, years of exhaustion and held-back dreams spilling into the light of her office. Clara didn't look away. She let him gather himself, her presence steady, unjudging. When silence finally settled, it wasn't heavy. It was the silence of something new beginning. The new sign gleamed in the morning sun, the letters straight and clean, Whitmore Auto and Repair. Beneath it, fresh paint glowed against the cinderblock walls, the wide bay doors rising with a smooth hum instead of their old groan. Inside, lifts shone with fresh metal, tools lined the walls in ordered rows, and the smell of new rubber and cut steel carried promise instead of fatigue. Ethan stood in the center of it all, his hands on his hips, not quite believing it was real. Only weeks earlier, he had been counting coins to keep the heater alive. Now the shop breathed with possibility. A place not built only for profit, but for something larger. The first customers came hesitantly. Word of mouth carried faster than advertising in a small town. A single mother with a sputtering sedan pulled up, worry written across her face. Ethan greeted her the way he had always done. Steady, kind, no judgment. When she explained she couldn't pay until next month, he only nodded. "Don't worry. You'll get back on the road today." He waved away her apology as though it were nothing. She left with more than just a running car. She left lighter, her relief visible as she buckled her children into the back seat. A week later, a veteran walked in, shoulders bent under years of weight heavier than service medals. Ethan shook his hand firmly and refused payment for a repair, insisting, "You've already paid enough." The man's eyes shone with something unspoken. It became a pattern: repairs done quietly, debts forgiven, kindness given without ledger. And something extraordinary happened. Customers began leaving small donations for others. Neighbors offered help with supplies. Even the parts distributors started extending credit more willingly. The little shop grew not just in size, but in heart. Ethan often thought back to the night when a broken crutch had fallen on the icy sidewalk. How small it had seemed: an hour's work, a refusal of money. Yet here he was, surrounded by the ripple that moment had started, a chain of generosity spreading outward like light through glass. Clara visited sometimes, slipping in without fanfare. She would walk the floor slowly, running her hand along the new tool chests, smiling at the sound of laughter from the waiting area. She never came as Clara Weston, business magnate. She came as Clara, the woman who once leaned on patched crutches and found her faith in humanity repaired alongside them. One evening, after the last car rolled out and the shop grew quiet, Ethan locked up and stood in the doorway. The neon sign buzzed softly above him, casting a warm glow onto the lot. He thought of the years he had worked alone, of nights spent fighting exhaustion with coffee and grit, of the dream he once tucked away because the numbers didn't bend. Now that dream stood before him, solid and alive, built not on profit alone, but on the simple belief that kindness, once given, multiplies. He whispered into the cooling air, the same word he used to keep himself going back in the hardest days. Tomorrow. Only now, it no longer sounded like a plea. It sounded like a promise.